When I talk about living the status quo and overcoming that, people will keep up appearances professionally, not just white picket fence with 2.5 kids, professionally to their own detriment. And I've seen it happen over and over again. Some of the most quote unquote successful lawyers in the city and across the country have these things that happen because they put themselves in that situation. And that's why I say that status quo and living to the status quo is an addiction. I'm not being flippant when I say that. I genuinely believe that people do things to the detriment of themselves and others to keep up with the status quo. And for lawyers, the status quo is being seen as successful.
I've often said if we were building the law from the ground up starting today and the court system from the ground up starting today, it wouldn't look anything like it does. If there was a silver lining to the pandemic, and it's not a thing that really has a silver lining, but if there were a silver lining to the pandemic, it would be that it forced us as a profession to look at the way we practice law, the way we handle court, and it forced us to make some major leaps and bounds in the use of remote working and virtual court systems. And I'm afraid that some of that is receding, and some of the innovations that we've gained, we're starting to lose because we are, I suppose, reverting to the mean. You turn the legal profession around about the way you turn a battleship around, very slowly. And sometimes there are forces at play that would discourage efficiency. For instance, judges, I think, don't like the convenience of virtual court because the convenience of it makes it harder to compel people to enter guilty pleas or to settle cases, simply because they just get worn down by all of the court appearances, and maybe the courts became too efficient over time. But I've often said, again, if we were going to build the court system from the ground up, it wouldn't look like it does. And Katheryn Burmeister and I talked a little bit about those issues, although we talked about some bigger issues in the practice of law and how the use of the traditional office and the trappings of success in law sometimes bring us down as a profession, sometimes individually contribute to the undoing of many lawyers. And so Katheryn Burmeister shared her story with what she went through in her transition from a lawyer practicing in what seemed like a successful law practice into something that was quite dysfunctional, in her transition to her own law office and how she built it from the ground up, and her transition to being a consultant to other unhappy lawyers to try to find some peace of mind practicing law. This was a really fantastic podcast that has caused me to re-examine a lot of the old assumptions that we have about what it even is to be successful as an attorney, and how often it is steeped in some materialistic view that is not even what we want, but sometimes we devolve into trying to impress people we don't particularly care for to begin with, and it doesn't make us any happier. It actually leads to our undoing. So lots of big practice issues in this podcast. I hope you'll enjoy it, and I hope you'll also check out Katheryn Burmeister's book, her website, a lot of the great resources and things she does to help other lawyers. And so without further delay, I give you Katheryn Burmeister. Katheryn, it's so good to have you. I have been looking forward to this. I think we've been friends on LinkedIn a really long time, and then a mutual friend said that I should have you on the podcast. So I'm very honored. I've been looking forward to this.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's one of those things on LinkedIn where you know a lot of people, but don't know a lot of people. So it's good that we've made this full circle.
Absolutely. So I do this with every podcast guest. I have them introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask you this question, and you can take it as a simple factual question, or you can take it as a deeply philosophical question, or somewhere in between. But who is Katheryn Burmeister?
Yeah, I think my knee-jerk reaction is deeply philosophical.
That's what I always hope for.
Yeah. So I am a very passionate, authentic person who wants to make my corner of the world the best that it can be. To the extent that I can make that a bigger corner. That's great, but I also recognize, just limitations in life and other people and the world in general. So just making my place as good as I can make it for others and myself.
And specifically, then, what is it that you would say you do for a living, or who do you hope? What do you hope to do when you grow up?
Right. So I'm now saying that I am a soon to be recovering attorney. I have a full time practice in personal injury that I've been running since 2018, but I am pivoting to being the happiness lawyer. So helping lawyers basically live a fulfilling life. Unfortunately, a lot of us, if not all of us, have a fear of failure, and that fear of failure really holds us back from leaning into who we want to be and recognizing who we want to be even. So my goal is to help people figure out who they are, where they want to be, and how to get there, like I've done for myself.
And we'll talk about the process of being a recovering lawyer a little bit later. But I'm always curious, and I always ask everybody who's a lawyer on the show, who I think is everybody I've had on the show has been a lawyer so far. Well, no, I've had a jury consultant on. I take that back, but she also has a law degree. What made you want to become a lawyer? What was it that drew you to the law? How did you get there?
Yeah, in middle school, I've always been an avid reader, but especially in middle school, I was just devouring books, and we had to read To Kill a Mockingbird and Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And those two writings together really just set a light bulb off for me. Particularly, even though Martin Luther King is not a lawyer, obviously, this idea of just and unjust laws resonated. And then To Kill a Mockingbird, obviously standing up for what's just through the law and making a difference in that regard, or trying to at least make a difference. So really seeing that power come to light through a profession made me want to be a lawyer. Nobody in my family was a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers, but I literally decided that's what I want to do, and figured out, okay, how do I get there? And laid out all the steps between where I was and being a lawyer, and just set myself on that path.
And tell me about that path. You going out of high school, like where did you go and what did you major in, and what were the things that you were doing, kind of in that part of your educational journey to become a lawyer?
Sure. So I even did joint enrollment, where, I don't know if you're familiar with that. My senior year in high school, instead of going to classes there, I took college classes at Kennesaw State. And then the other half of my day would be spent actually working in a law firm. So I was quick to get exposure to all different types of law and size firms, so I could really see, hey, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? So I worked in a small general practice firm in Canton during my high school senior year. After I graduated from high school, I went down to Mercer and worked at a big international firm during the summers as a document clerk. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I took 2 years off after undergrad, worked there full time, still at that international firm, and then went to law school. And I was able to start exposing myself to even more practice areas, and which included personal injury. So my third year of law school was when I first came in touch with PI, and I fell in love with it. I just love the idea of that David and Goliath mentality, going against the insurance companies and standing up for people who had been wronged in a physical way. So it just really resonated with me, and that was my first exposure. And so from there, I ended up holding out for a plaintiff's job, because I'd obviously worked big firm defense and desperately did not want to go back to it. I knew how draining it could be, and not in a good way. Draining when you're passionate about something is, different than draining and just being miserable. So I really held out for that plaintiff's job, and ended up getting it not long after I got licensed.
This is the plaintiff's job that you discuss for the bulk of your book.
Yes, it is. So my book, Overcoming Addiction to the Status Quo, the middle part of that is where I talk about that experience with that first firm, my dream job.
So when you were going through law school, it was fairly late in the game that you decided that you wanted to do plaintiff's work?
It was. I mean, I'd always been interested in criminal. I mean, it's sexy. So I think that's why it's appealing to a lot of people. I considered family law. And really, my original passion was animal law. I'm a huge animal advocate generally, and really had seen through philanthropic work that I'd done the law being used to advocate for better conditions for domestic animals, farm animals, wild animals, and I wanted to do that. Turns out in the Southeast, there really isn't a big demand for that. Most of that demand is out on the West Coast, and even then it's very small group of people. So as a practical matter, I decided to get into something that was more sustainable for the long term, and allowed me to stay where I am since my roots are here. My husband was already here working for a number of years at the same company. And fortunately, I found something that I was just as passionate about.
Yeah, I think the one animal rights lawyer in the state has already been a guest on the podcast. It's interesting that you mentioned that. Jessica Rock is someone I interviewed several months ago, and she's great and inspirational.
Oh, she's amazing, yeah.
So you decide to go into plaintiffs, and I got from the book that you had I know that you were in that international law firm for a little bit when you were in school, and I got the sense that you maybe had some experience in big law other than that as well, or was I reading that wrong?
No, that was all at the same law firm. So
Okay.
it was just 2 summers in undergrad and then 2 years after undergrad that I worked there. So it was broken up a little bit, but all at the same firm doing the same type of work.
Yeah, and you talk about some struggles with the bar exam and with law school and, trying to find the right job. And one thing that comes across to me, not only when you talk about the journey you took to become a lawyer, but also what you went through as a lawyer is, you do talk a lot about vulnerability, and we'll get to that. And, you reference Brene Brown quite a bit, who's really big on vulnerability. But, what comes across, and I don't think this is ever an adjective that you use to describe yourself in the book, but I finished this book thinking, man, she's tough. I thought, man, you're actually very tough to have gone through what you went. First of all, to go through what you went through and to talk about it in a book that openly, and then to have gone through the experience in the firm with its kind of, I guess I'll call it a meltdown.
Yep.
There's a lot of toughness in that.
Thank you. It's it was. And you're right. I don't describe myself as that. I don't even think I use resilient, even though I recognize that I am. It's one of those things. I want people to learn from it. I don't want people to think I'm looking for gold stars at the end of the day. And also, not least of which, I think there's plenty of other people that are tough and resilient too, and I don't want to detract from those stories. So I'm always trying to be conscious of that. But no, I appreciate that, and I think that's ultimately why I was able to pivot to having my own practice, and then now transitioning to being the happiness lawyer. Is I've realized how strong and resilient I am, and I hadn't really believed it up until that point.
Well, it's interesting. Usually when lawyers talk about starting their own practice, that's an incredibly hard thing to do. But I guess you sort of realize you had been running a practice all along.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's almost like when you get to the part where you're starting your own practice in the book, that almost sounds easy compared to what you had been doing.
100%. It was, I never wanted my own practice. I never wanted my own business. And after I'd gone through what I had with the meltdown, like you said, I'm going to start describing it as Chernobyl because that is a great way
Right.
to do it. Yeah, it did seem easy. I wasn't afraid anymore. And because I'd been, I won't say scared straight because there's nothing straight to scare me about, but I stared into the face of what I thought the worst could be. And I think at that point, when you've done it, you think the worst that can happen is I have to start over or go get a new job. Things don't seem as scary when you see the worst for yourself.
Now, that PI job that, and we'll talk more about it in a minute, that you took, was that your first law job out of law school as a newly minted lawyer?
No, I had a short stint at a small firm, a small PI firm, where a lot of promises were made, and the partner did not fulfill those not in a things don't work out kind of way, just blatantly kind of did a 180. and I was told I was a luxury that he couldn't afford. And he started making allegations that I wasn't working, and completing the work, which was baseless in its entirety. But so I had a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth about just the realities of the world anyway. But I was there for a little bit after I'd been licensed, and then went back looking for another personal injury plaintiff's job in personal injury.
And the way you describe, when you interview for the job that you ended up in for a while, it has a movie quality to it. There's a cinematic quality to it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it is very much like the beginning of a Grisham book.
It is. It's crazy. I did not intend for it to be that way, but it just literally started to take that life on its own.
Fancy. So as I recall the scene, it's fancy conference room. It's floor to ceiling windows. You go in and you ask for a particular salary. You've got you have kind of an older, seemingly mentor figure who says, no, you're not asking for nearly enough, and you're offered a higher salary than the one you requested, and things seem like they're going well.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened. And I've never had an easier interview process. It seemed like everything clicked and fell into place. I got along with the partner. I got along with the associate that was there, the senior associate that was doing the interview as well. And it worked. It seemed like it was kismet.
And it was, how big a firm was it?
So there was the partner, two other associates, two associates, the one that was interviewing me, one other man, and then myself, and there was a support staff of 3 at that time. So fairly small.
And then you get into it, and I think you pretty soon have your own caseload, and I think he's taking you to court with him, and you're sitting in for depositions, and things seem kind of perfect.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So, and I had my own paralegal. We brought somebody else on she was amazing, just amazing. Had no training in the legal field at all, but was quick to learn and attentive to detail, which, in my opinion, is really all you need for somebody to actually do well in the legal profession. You can teach all the other stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was doing. My partner was really teaching me the right way in terms of practicing. He wasn't keeping us under his thumb and having us just do grunt work, which so many firms, I don't even think it's a necessity. I think they just choose to do that, almost keeping you in the background and not really letting you be a quote-unquote real lawyer.
So, I mean, it sounds like to some extent, and we'll talk about where things went terribly wrong later, but it sounds like to some extent you did get some good mentoring in the early time that you were in that firm.
Oh, I did. And that's what's probably the hardest to reconcile once we get to that other, the other part of the story is I was taught right, or the right things and how to be a good lawyer and a detailed and dedicated one. So it makes the whole situation even worse in a way. Mm-hmm. I don't know, man. At least I got the benefit of that. So I guess that's not obviously a bad thing. But it just makes it a little more astounding what happened.
And how long were you there before the big thing happened that kind of changed everything?
1.5 years.
Okay. And in that 1.5 years, I mean, had you gone to trial and done things like that at that point?
So we had not gone to trial. Everything ended up resolving ahead of time, literally like the night before. But a number of trials had already taken place before I'd started there. I was, initiating suit, following through with complex discovery and, advanced litigation pieces. So I really was doing, the entire case except for the trial. And again, that wasn't lack for trying of any of us. It just, they were settling.
But you were getting close to, and you were preparing for trials. I mean, you had done pretty much everything in that 1.5 years.
Definitely.
And how old are you at this point in time? At the point in time where you're a new lawyer in this firm?
Oh, good question.
Or just roughly. I mean, are you in your 20s at this point?
Yeah, I'm still in my 20s.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then one day you get a call in the middle of the night from, I guess, a new partner in the firm telling you to come in early the next morning, and you don't know really what it's about.
No, I don't. And he was the senior associate who had recently become a new partner. And that's never a good thing, right? A text in the middle of the night from your employer and anyone in that capacity is never a good thing. So in my mind, again, I was still new-ish, the youngest one, the newest lawyer. the only female in a male-dominated profession, let alone a male-dominated practice area. I thought it was me. That's just, I've always been really self-critical, and that's what I thought.
You thought you'd done something wrong.
I did, yeah. And so we had to be in there before staff, and I get in there with the other associate and the now new partner for just a month. And, God, I can just, it's one of those things in your life, like, where were you when 9/11 happened? It's the same thing. It's, I can just absolutely see the room, sitting there in the guest chairs across from somebody's desk, and the new partner coming in and sitting down behind his desk. And I've always been very perceptive of people, just the energy, their facial expressions, just vibes, for lack of a better phrase. And I very much knew something was wrong beyond just a mistake. And what probably stood out the most was the partner who founded the business was not there. And the new partner told us that the founding partner had committed suicide. And he had been stealing from clients for 8 years. So that obviously rocked myself and the other associate to our core, to say the least.
And how long? I mean, was it immediately known that what the motive for the suicide was, and that he had been taking money from clients, or is that something that developed? I mean, I know the details of it developed over time, but was that immediately apparent?
It was. He left notes. He left notes to the state bar. He left notes to myself and the other associate, the partner, his daughters, the staff. And he literally said in the one to the state bar that we read, if, it's between this and prison, this is what I'm doing. And, I don't think any of us wanted to believe it, because obviously you don't want to think that at all about somebody, let alone somebody who you felt like was teaching you the right way to practice law and be a lawyer. And then beyond that, he would be the first person to give you his shirt off his back. So it just did not align. I mean, I think we really thought that there was some underlying, like, I don't know, he was covering for something else. Like, it just didn't make sense. And none of us had any idea or any inclination that anything like that was going on.
Well, I mean, I know you mentioned in the book that when a case settled and it was time to sort of work out the escrow and do the settlement statements, that he kind of cordoned that off for himself. And I mean, so, I guess hindsight being 2020 as it is, you kind of saw that he was taking that portion of the end of a case and sort of being secretive about it.
Right, but I wouldn't even say secretive. It's how many lawyers, do you know that are unorganized, aren't good business people.
Like half the bar?
Right.
Right.
So it's not that unusual now, especially having more experience seeing that it was a little disorganized, that he was still doing things old school in terms of writing checks by hand and not like having it all be done on the computer. So, and since it was the money part also, I guess, I thought in my mind, okay, well, he's running the finances, so that's why he's doing it. And I didn't have any other reference point for resolving, cases and settlements and what that process was like, except for this. When I worked at the personal injury firm in my third year law school, it was much more paralegal, new lawyer type work. I wasn't even getting into like liens and settlement and finances or anything like that. So I had nothing to base my perception on except for what I saw then.
And I think one of the things you learned is, to some extent, what was motivating him to do that is, I know he was in a relationship with someone who maybe had addiction issues, who may or may not have been extorting him, something like that.
Yeah, I think that was part of it, and we knew there were problems there with the relationship, so that's why my initial reaction was maybe he's falling the sword for her for something, and that he was just saying that it was this. I don't, I couldn't even piece it together. It's just such a mind-boggling situation when anyone commits suicide, clearly, let alone everything else that came with it in that letter. It was just a lot to process. And then also, I mean, there wasn't any glaring thing. It wasn't like, oh, he's driving around in Bentleys and buying new, Italian suits. Like, he was seriously somebody who wore they weren't Crocs, but they were like basically Crocs shorts and like a fishing shirt. Like it just didn't make any sense.
And, fast forward, I mean, it's basically you and this really great paralegal that you describe, and the person you describe in the book as the new partner, left to kind of pick the pieces up. And I know that there's an issue with, you were dealing with the state bar, and you were trying to get all the clients paid off you thought it was going to be insurance proceeds that the family was going to pay to sort of get the firm back on its footing. And then they decided to keep that money, and it sounded like it was just I mean, I think I got stressed out reading it.
Yeah, it really, and that's where I always say it sounds like it could easily be a John Grisham movie, because it is just so dramatic, and every day was something new. Every day, I mean, it was already stressful enough, like, again, the situation that we were dealing with, and let alone finding out new information and having to pivot yet again and pivot yet again. And you have to keep in mind, there was an entire firm to keep running. So it was so much. You didn't even have time to process it. And what I've always done when significant things have happened in my life, I have a tendency to throw myself into work, and I think a lot of us do that. And it's a distraction, and it keeps us going. Well, when the catastrophic thing is your work, it makes it almost even harder to do, or at least compartmentalize, right? Because every waking minute was spent thinking about the firm and what had happened and what was going to happen and what we had control of, what we didn't have control of. It was insane.
And at this point, you're in your late 20s. You don't really have any equity in the firm.
No.
It would be an easy thing, in that position to walk away from. But you hung on there how long trying to pick the pieces and reorganize?
I held on just over a year. So I thought about it while we've been talking, and I turned 30 the winter after the suicide. So, I helped continue this firm from August of 2017 to September of 2018.
So a little over a year.
31. Yeah.
A little over a year. And it's sort of the three main characters that are in the book. It would be you and the person you referred to as the new partner, and then this really great paralegal.
Yes.
And it's the three of you. And I guess we all deal with trauma in our own way, but it sounds like the new partner maybe was paralyzed, maybe had some decision paralysis, or maybe he seemed to be kind of checked out for a good bit of that process.
He did, and I had to be honest, a really hard time writing this part of the book. I had a hard time living it, clearly.
Right.
And I was so empathetic to what we were experiencing that I gave him a lot of credit where probably I shouldn't. And I say that only insofar as I was living the same thing too. I get that his name was on the door, but we all went through the same experience, and I was emotionally carrying my own weight, let alone my paralegals as a superior leader, figure, and then his as well. And so my empathy and sympathy at this point has waned dramatically, only insofar as, we were all experiencing it. But he checked out mentally and physically.
Now, one thing I didn't, and it doesn't, and I'm not trying to, I don't want to do anything that exposes any names or anything, because I know you're very careful to speak very generally. But was this person much older than you, or roughly your same age? No, roughly your same age?
Roughly my same age. I'd say roughly 4, 5, 6 years older than me at the most. He had actually grown up with the founding partner's daughters.
Okay. And I know that it just sounds like you were just day and night holding this together, taking care of the, it's tough to run a firm and bring in new business, and even under the most normal and ordinary circumstances. But beyond that, you're trying to make up about I think it was around $1 million that you were trying to pay, like sort of make these the original clients whole.
Right. So I think what's interesting about this whole situation that we learned is when you have a firm that, not that anybody else is going to be in this situation, God forbid, but we had the firm beforehand for the month that the senior associate came on as the new partner. That was a new firm, right? And then the founding partner committed suicide. So during that time, that month, and then a little bit after, it was a new firm, quote unquote. And I remember telling him, you need to change the name. Like, you need to at least change the name to distance yourself from this. And so then it basically I think it was just a name change. It was just a name change. So, but still, it was a new firm. So those old firm cases weren't our cases. They were the old firm's cases. So the logistics of managing that when nobody exists from the original firm, it was really convoluted. And unfortunately, the bar didn't help us at all. I mean, they were right in what they were saying they're not your cases, they're not your responsibility. However, we both agreed, yeah, it may not be our responsibility, but
there's a moral.
Right, clearly. What are we going to do? Just not pick up the phone? Like, I didn't know how that was going to work out in their mind logistically. So we did. We dealt with it to the extent that we could, try to help them, try to get information to them. We didn't know half the time what was going to be happening because he died intestate, so without a will. He had no assets to speak of. I mean, I think it was something crazy, like $4,000 in his personal assets because he leased a car and, rented a house. The operating account had something like $10,000 left in it. IELTS had nothing. So it was just... Yeah, it was just the logistics of it were a nightmare. And we finally pieced together that he had stolen about $1 million. And we thought that the insurance proceeds, so the malpractice insurance proceeds, would help. Well, it turns out, it makes sense. If you lie every year on your application for renewal about any known or, likely cases of malpractice arising, they're not going to cover that when that comes up. So... not only were we not getting the coverage to help compensate these people, but then we're worried about, okay, what ramifications does that have for us practicing right now, even though we had nothing to do with it?
Yeah, that sounds like a frightening turn in your life, that you find out that your partner has committed suicide and there's no money left in the account. Oh, and the clients and the bar may hold you somewhat accountable.
Oh, yeah. And that's what I was most afraid of at that point personally, is what implication long term is this going to have on me? And for the longest time I just didn't talk about it, and I finally realized that people would not hold me accountable as a new lawyer for something that someone who had practiced for 30 years and who ran all the finances and was the only one on the finances made decisions about. So, but it's still, it was the least of my concerns at that point. We were just trying to survive day to day.
And for about a year, it's kind of you and the paralegal doing this very Herculean task of trying to maintain this law firm and fix what was broken with a partner that had been checked out. I want to fast forward to kind of the breaking point, which is you're on this what sounds like a wonderful trip. I think is it Portugal?
I was in Portugal, yes.
And you had been horseback riding, and you would come in and like you get a phone call from your phone that's like in a saddlebag or something.
Yeah, it was on a saddlebag, and because I was taking pictures and stuff on my phone, and is my paralegal. I'm thinking to myself, and clearly we've gotten very close, and in this time frame with everything that happened. But I'm like, this can't possibly be happening to me. And I answered the phone, and she needed permission to pay for our private process server to go out and perfect service on a defendant. Then that weekend, the statute was going to run on Monday.
It was going to run that following Monday, and you had to get this person served.
Yes. So, and I said, yes, of course. I said, why didn't you call our partner? And she said, I did. He's not responding. And I said, did you leave him a voicemail? Did you check it? Yeah. And he had gone off on a retreat in middle Georgia, a silent retreat. So he was not talking, was not answering his phone, was not doing any technology or communication at all. And I'd left this country thinking that, hey, the person in charge of the business would, take up the slack. And we talked about the statute coming up, everything. Like, we all discussed it. And he hadn't gotten what he needed to our paralegal in time for her to discuss it with him before he left. And then he just checked out. So that was the point where I just, I knew it was a problem clearly anyway, but I managed to compartmentalize for the last bit of the trip. And then I came back on Monday and he was still on this silent retreat. And I remember, again, sitting at my desk and just not being able to process another thought.
Because you came dangerously close to malpractice while you were in Portugal, and you thought you were trying to be on vacation.
Yeah, 100%. And so that was, we checked that box, got that taken care of. And I mean, anybody who does personal injury and litigation and personal injury knows that, it's tons of deadlines, right? I mean, there's a lot of things. That's why our malpractice insurance is one of the highest ones. I think like second to like mergers and acquisitions or something. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. And so, best case scenario, we get it done 6 months in advance. Sometimes it would be closer to the statute. It's fine. As long as it gets taken care of, it gets taken care of. But that was dangerously close, like you said. And so I just sat there and thought, I can't process another thing, literally, like not even what I'm doing with the next second of my life, let alone the next 5 minutes, let alone the next day. And I just thought, what if honestly, I don't think I've ever actually said this out loud about what my actual thought was, but my thought was, what if I just drive off the road on the way home?
Or what if I think you said in the book, well, what if I weren't here? Or
Yeah, and that's specifically what I was thinking was, what if I just drove off the road on the way home? And
that's suicide talk.
Yeah, it is.
That's suicidal ideations, as you describe it.
It's suicidal ideations. It's not like I'm going to do this or here's my plan at this point I'm going to, but that idea of just not wanting to be here. And I was so tired. It's not like I really didn't want to be here. I was just exhausted because every waking minute had been spent dedicated to this firm. I woke up thinking about, went to sleep thinking about it. I mean, you think about work now when you're just stressed out when things are functioning normally, quote unquote. It was to the nth degree during this time. And I didn't know how else. I did enough know to that there were other options, thankfully. But at that point, I didn't know how else to process it.
I mean, and you're so paralyzed. You call. This is the point where you call your husband to ask him to come home right away.
I do, and so I've dealt and managed anxiety and depression throughout my life. I have actively managed it and done well, been in therapy, and I think everybody can benefit from therapy as a side note. But I thankfully knew enough about that and who I am and where I was at that moment to call somebody to help me. And so I did. I asked him to meet me at home, called him out of a meeting, and he was there for me. And I just kind of kept my eyes and mind on that, like just get home to see your husband, just get home to see your husband, and was able to sit with him and process things to the extent that I could.
Who you describe in the book as a type B personality.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. I mean, he manages and does great with business and everything, and so he has to be A-type there, but personally, and then, in our relationship and things, he's just much more of a B person. And so dealing with somebody who's like me in my personal life and professional life can be a little intense sometimes. And then clearly just the simple fact that you care about someone and been with them this long, to see them going through something that they couldn't fix is, I can only imagine, traumatic.
And it seems like, I mean, you go through this experience, and I think it's within days the new partner comes back from his silent retreat,
yeah.
And you've kind of been through hell from the moment the phone rang in Portugal to going and literally asking your husband to come be with you because you're thinking about not being here, and I just kind of see him breezing in, talking about how awesome.
Oh, he did.
And how fulfilled that silent retreat left him. And I think I gathered that was the end for you.
Oh, yeah, it was. Again, like, where were you when certain events happened? That's another one I can just distinctly replay in my mind. Him sitting there in the guest chair in my office and just super excited. And I was just so amazed. Not everybody, again, is like me that can pick up on the vibes, but I'm sure my facial expression did not, show that I was happy and like into this conversation. So
I think you said something. Well, while you were out finding yourself, I forget what the exact line was, but
Oh,
basically,
it was while you were out finding yourself, I was trying not to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And of course, he stopped and pulled up short. And I just, it was mind-boggling to me.
So I have to ask, and this was the question I had. Well, I mean, just factually, I think what happens is you end up I think he ends up, I think, telling you he can't really afford to have you or anyone else work there. But I think ultimately you were about to leave had he not done that. Is kind of the sense I got from the book.
Yes. So one thing, my last, clearly I had done more than enough, but in my mind, I wanted to have I didn't want to have any doubts in my mind about what I had done and where I stood with things. So I even suggested, I can't remember if it was before this or after this, honestly. I think about going to like a
business coach or a
counseling
business
or counselor. Yeah, a business counselor about this to try to like, at least can we plan for the next week? He couldn't even agree to plan like what our goal was for the next week. And I was like, I'm done. I'm 100% done. I have literally done everything I possibly can, paid for us to do this, to try to salvage something or have some sort of definitive next step. And he would not commit. And that's I knew before we had those meetings that it was 95% done. And before he told me he couldn't afford to pay me anymore, but then that just was the nail in the coffin.
Well, so I have to ask, I mean, again, and you don't, I mean, I think you had been promised potential equity in the firm, but who knows? I just have to ask, because I was asking myself this the entire book, and maybe this is the title. I mean, maybe this is where the title of your book comes from, which is Overcoming Addiction to the Status Quo. I have to ask, I mean, why didn't you just walk away from all of this and start your own firm initially, or go somewhere? I mean, why did you stick it out for a year?
Yeah. You're not the first person to ask me that. My friends did while I was going through it. I was afraid. I was not confident in starting my own practice at any point, I think, before then, because I'd never run one. I mean, for all the reasons people are concerned about opening up shop.
you were running one. You just didn't realize you were running one.
I think that was part of it.
Yeah.
And then, and everything was happening so intensely all the time that I just didn't have time to process it. I think the other part of it was, I desperately wanted to have that camaraderie and be able to keep it together, keep us together, since we'd gone through all of this, since we knew, worked well together, worked well insofar as we were functioning to any capacity at that point. But that, I think I just wanted it to work. And I think I didn't believe in myself until that point where I hit what I call my rock bottom. Mm-hmm. And that's ultimately what I realized when I started writing my book, was I had finally proven to myself overnight, when I had those suicidal ideations, that I was enough. Mm-hmm. And I had done enough. And up until that point, I just hadn't believed it. I have always been somebody that has gone above and beyond and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and still, thought I wasn't doing enough. And so that's why I held on for so long.
It's very interesting, the risk piece of it. It seems like between having nothing in the escrow account and dealing with the bar and wondering if you were going to be held liable or partially responsible at the beginning, all that fear, running the situation as a newly minted lawyer in your late 20s with a partner that was kind of checking out. I mean, that's a much riskier environment. That's a much riskier day-to-day than starting your own practices. But it's so strange that we don't see that until after.
Right. Well, I think it's like anything else. When you're in the thick of it, you can only see what's right in front of you. And that's what we did for a year. And what I did, I could only process what I could. And there was a threshold that I just wasn't able to pass. And I think when I started realizing, I knew clearly well before this point that things were not good. This was not sustainable. But I foolishly thought if I tried harder, which is kind of always the way I thought, if I tried harder, it would work out. Well, you can't will something to happen that's just not possible, right? I mean, mm-hmm. You can't force somebody to do something they don't want to do. And But, and I also didn't have any background. I hadn't been exposed to the running of a law firm. So even my mentors, most people just don't tell you the day-to-day logistics of running a practice. They sure as heck don't teach us in law school about it. That's why so many of us are horrible business owners. They don't talk about it. They don't tell you. People don't want to open up, and pull back the curtain to be honest about the struggles and the challenges and all that. And so I literally lived through it, and it wasn't my money, but I definitely spent all of my energy and time running a practice. And so at that point, it was like, what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work out and I have to go get another job. Okay. I'll try. I'll at least say I tried, and go from there.
Now, in starting your own practice, and this is pre-pandemic by several years, right? I mean, we're
Yes, 2 years.
2018 is when you did this. The practice that you started for yourself sounds a lot like a post 2020 practice looks.
Yeah, it was. In the time that I'd been there running that practice, I saw the pitfalls of what we could have done better, aside from the obvious of working for somebody who stole money. Don't work for somebody who steals money. I lower your overhead, drastically reduce your overhead. There is absolutely zero reason to have a dedicated office space as a personal injury lawyer. You can say there is, but there really isn't. If you can get access to space for when you need it, even pre-pandemic, then why do you need to be storing physical files? Why do you need for somebody to be sitting in an office 9 to 5 with their butt in a computer seat if they can do it somewhere else? It just is not efficient. And at the end of the day, that was my goal. Keep the overhead as low as possible and, go from there. And I've always been about efficiencies, and I feel like a good leader. And I was able to create an environment amongst my team that I found that allowed us to function, not just function, but succeed in what we were doing. And you have to realize my paralegals that I had all were out of state. I'd never met them up until one of them that I happened to meet when I was in Arizona where she lived, and we met up, but I never met my other 2 paralegals, still haven't.
So you started off as a completely distributed law firm.
Yeah.
And how did you, I don't mean specifically, but generally, how did you find, what would a person do to find paralegals that would work in the kind of arrangement that you had when you started out?
Yeah, I used Upwork. Upwork has a lot of different professionals on there, support professionals on there, and there are a lot of paralegals. And so that's what I went on and and they're independent contractors. And I went on there and started interviewing them and found people that were really good at specific things. I've worked with both models. I've worked with people who the paralegals did the entire case just for a set number of cases. And then I've worked where paralegals have done the specific tasks for all the cases, but every paralegal essentially worked on every case just in a different capacity. And I feel like, people do better at what they enjoy doing and what they're good at. So instead of breaking up the number of cases amongst paralegals, I broke up the tasks among paralegals.
What do you mean by that? Instead of breaking up what do you mean specifically?
Yeah, so I had a full caseload when I left this partner.
Because you took a significant portion of the cases with you.
I did. I took about, I'd say, over half. I took all the cases that were in litigation. That's what he did not want. And honestly, I could have taken all of them. Legally, I'd been working on them the entire time. Realistically, the bandwidth wouldn't have been there. I mean, there's just no way. And I didn't want to end things on a bad note or any worse than they were, right? I just wanted to be done and start this next process and just move on. So I took all the ones that are litigation, and I just realized that anybody who's tried to do it on their own, if you're scaling up, that's one thing. Because my colleague from before, the other associate, he did this. He scaled up on his own, didn't have any cases, and he was really able to do a great job at putting in automations while he did it, as he went. I think, and I look back and go, wow, I should have done that. But the reality is I had a full caseload with all of these cases well into litigation. It was just keeping my head above water. So let alone bringing in more business. So in 6, 8, 10 months, I wasn't going, where the heck is, a cash flow.
And what did you do about that? Because that seems like the scariest part.
Bringing in cases?
Yes.
Yeah. So I had never generated cases in my life. And so to answer your question too, back about like, why did I stay in it for so long? I didn't have a natural network. I had never gone out to generate business. I never had to. I've lived in Atlanta all my life, but I didn't have that network. The partner I was working for did. A lot of people knew him. He knew a lot of people, and work just came to us. So that was another part of what I was terrified about. Yeah, I've run this law firm, but like you just said, a huge part of it is bringing in more business, and I didn't even know where to start with that. So,
And you describe yourself in the book, and you describe, and thank goodness someone's finally said this. You've described litigators generally. I mean, not every litigator, but litigators generally as introverts, which is absolutely what I am. And when I tell people I'm an introvert, they laugh. They think there's no way you're an introvert.
Right, same with me.
you're so outgoing, and I think I've read Susan Cain's The Quiet, and it kind of made it all make sense, which is extroverts take energy from being around other people, and introverts lose energy from being around other people, and it has nothing to do with whether you're shy or not. But that does make networking hard if you're an introvert.
Absolutely. And then not having a name in this business at all. I mean, it's not like I've been going to events even with my other partner. So having a new firm, not knowing people, not even knowing where to start. And then also just the bandwidth. How was I going to do this with a full caseload? So I knew very quickly even though I've literally done the jobs from a legal assistant all the way up to a lawyer and knew what to do every day for my cases, I couldn't do it and still generate business at the same time.
And also if the cases that you took were already in litigation, so you also had to finance that litigation.
Yeah, it was.
What did you do? I'm curious.
I took a personal loan for myself, and I was in a very fortunate place where my husband's done very well with his business and his work and his job, and so I was able to invest my money into it. But we all know, and I think that's the reality of what doesn't get talked about, is it's extremely expensive. And I know people that have had to put 2 mortgages on their house, or just go into crazy situations to keep the money coming in. And that's how these things happen. And that's why when I talk about living the status quo and overcoming that, people will keep up appearances professionally, not just white picket fence with 2.5 kids, professionally, to their own detriment. And I've seen it happen over and over again. Some of the most quote unquote successful lawyers in the city and across the country have these things that happen because they put themselves in that situation.
Well, so you speak of this. This is a kind of an undercurrent in the last half of your book, is that you definitely see lawyers in maybe with a little bit of a skeptical light. You like particularly the ones that appear to be at the top of their game. Yep. That's just kind of, I don't know that you exactly, maybe you say that, but it's definitely an undercurrent if you don't explicitly say that in the book.
I think that's true. I don't specifically say it, but as a fair observation and assessment, and I that is true. I am skeptical not because I want to see people fail or it's not possible. I think it is possible. I do think that so many people rush into things, and it's not just because it wasn't, I couldn't do it. That has nothing to do with it. It's just I know of enough stories and have seen enough people, have issues to know that it's extremely, extremely difficult. And if you can do it, it takes a number of years. It takes a small fortune, and it takes a very specific model to make it work. And then even if all those stars line up, you are going to be sacrificing yourself to do it. And that's just, there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just how much, if you're going to be saying yes to all these things with your firm and everything works out, you're going to be saying no to a lot of other things. And it's just a matter of what you're saying no to. And unfortunately, that tends to be everything else in your life.
I just recently read a book called The Psychology of Money by a guy named Morgan Housel. and it's called Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness. I think he runs a hedge fund now, but he talks a lot about, I think something you just said there makes me think of something he said, which is when he was maybe in college, he was a valet in the Bay Area. And so a lot of wealthy people driving all kinds of like crazy sports cars would drive up, and he would park those cars. And he made the realization at some point along the way that a lot of the people that were getting out of those cars were not happy. Like, we're not happy people generally. And that he also made the realization he didn't want a car like that because he couldn't remember who the people were who actually had those cars, because the moment he saw those people driving up in those cars, he didn't think about them as much as he thought about himself being in that car. And so literally you're kind of invisible when you do that kind of thing. I just wonder why it is that I mean, and this isn't a thing just limited to lawyers, but why it is that there's a tendency in this profession to, to have, nothing, you're on fumes with your bank account, but you are leasing lavish cars and condos and stuff like that. What do you think's behind that?
A fear of failure, 100%, 100% fear of failure. And now how people are defining failure is the crux of it, right? And when I talk about being the happiness lawyer, how do you define happiness? And it's in a lot of lawyers' minds, and I would say the vast majority of them, and almost all of them in personal injury in particular, is we don't want to be seen for not succeeding. And anything short of making money, having the big cases, winning big money on the cases is going to be seen as failure in their minds. And it was in my mind for a while. That's what I thought success was. And the reality is it's not. Money, clearly you have to have bare minimum, your needs and necessities met with money. I'm not saying money is not important. But money in and of itself, I would argue, even though people push back on this, does not make you happy. Mm-hmm. Experiences you can have with money, perhaps. And even then, there's plenty of people that have tons of money and can have experiences and are miserable. But money in and of itself and notoriety and, accolades and things like that don't make you happy. It just accentuates who you are, whether you're a good person or not.
The same book that I just talked about a minute ago, he says in there that the best thing that money can purchase for you, if to the extent that it can buy you happiness, is if you use it to purchase freedom and autonomy.
Yeah.
But if you're using it to purchase things, you're kind of enslaved to it and the things that you're purchasing with it.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll be the first one to say I like cars, and I like exotic cars, but I'm also not, putting mortgages on my house to buy it. Right. It's you can, again, have good experiences and fun experiences traveling and doing things, but you don't do it to the detriment of yourself. And that's why I say that status quo and living to the status quo is an addiction. I'm not being flippant when I say that. I genuinely believe that people do things to the detriment of themselves and others to keep up with the status quo. And for lawyers, the status quo is being seen as successful, mm-hmm. and however that's defined within your practice area. I think it plagues personal injury the most because we work on contingency.
Yeah, you don't get paid till the end, and if
right.
if the case flops or you can't settle it, I mean, and one thing about criminal defense or domestic or anything other than contingency work is win or lose, you've gotten paid at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
And gosh, if you did criminal appeals and you worked on a contingency, you really would be.
Yeah.
You really would be poor. Now, I mean, I think there's trade-offs, and there's a lot that can be said for, one of the problems with criminal defense is you don't evaluate it on the strength of the case.
Right.
And so you end up taking a bad case if they have the money to pay you, and you end up sending really defensible great cases away because they can't. What I do like about personal injury is that that's not really a factor in whether you take the case or not.
Right. Right. No, it is nice. I mean, you're right. Like anything, there's pros and cons. And but think about it. You don't have to have a business degree for somebody to say, hey, here's a business model. We don't know when you're going to get paid, how much you're going to get paid, or even if you're going to get paid, you have to invest your own money, and it may take 10, 12, 16, 18 months to even see some of it. It's a horrible business model.
and if you can't settle it, you have to go into an arena, and then 12 people you don't know are going to decide, or 6 people you don't know are going to decide.
And you don't have full control of the case. You've got a client who can pull the plug at any moment, and you've got opposing counsel, an insurance company, who, your only alternative and way to hold their feet to the fire, like you said, is going to that arena with 12 people that, that's just like going into Walmart and closing your eyes and picking 12 people. That's your jury.
Yeah, and by the way, if it's a really good case, some unscrupulous people may try to take it away from you. So come do this. It sounds fun, right?
Exactly. Well, and that's why when people always say they want to get in a personal injury, I'm very upfront with them, and I see the market. Personal injury has always been saturated, right? I think people think that it looks not easy, but like you can make a lot of money. You can, but you also it's not guaranteed, and a lot of it, like I say in the book, is smoke and mirrors. It's keeping up with appearances just to get to that point where you hopefully can, and putting yourself on a hamster wheel, because even if you get the multi-million-dollar cases, right? It's great to have a trucking case, but to defend or to prosecute, pursue a trucking case, you have to have the money to do it, like you said. It's not cheap, especially for these injuries where people are paying out millions of dollars for. The insurance company's not just going to write you a check for the hell of it. So paying that, then you start getting more and more cases that are that big. You've created this huge monster, and you've got to keep feeding it.
So when you started your practice, you did something. I think the things you did, I think if you did it now, anew, it would not be as much of a head turner maybe as it was just a few years ago. But you decided not to have an office. You decided to mainly work from home, and I think you had some sort of an office arrangement where you had the use of a conference room, and your staff was virtual. Again, I think people are more accepting of that now. At the time, people probably thought that this is all crazy.
Oh, they did. I absolutely thought it was crazy. And, some people, not the people that I would want to work with or do business with or refer cases, but you could just see almost like the disdain on their face. It's just funny to me now because, again, everybody's keeping up with that status quo of having the marble, conference table, having the dedicated office, corner office, whatever it is. Even if it's a small place in, one city, you have your corner office and you have your accolades on the wall and some place to put it, and people can see it and clients can come in and see it. I'll tell you what, I have never had a client say that they didn't, they questioned my credibility or
they didn't say, Kathryn, where's your trophies? Like, where's
right,
your
right? Where's your conference room that has marble tables? Like, and that's the thing. You got to realize who your audience is and who your ideal clients are. They don't care. They do not care about that. Maybe if you're representing the Fortune 500 companies, and even then I would argue that, the people who are really looking for the right attorneys, they're not going to care, whether you have marble or granite or, some like foreign wood that was imported. It's whether you can do the job or not. And that's what it should be based on. But we all know that people, don't do that always.
And you weren't, and I think you described, you weren't wearing fancy suits. You were wearing jeans and something nice when you went, and it was never a problem.
Nope, never a problem. I figured if I was going to go through hell and back and open up my own practice, I was going to wear what I wanted. And also, it doesn't create a divide between you and the client. I think in such a personal situation where somebody's been injured and is emotionally hurting, physically hurting, lost, feels slighted by the insurance company because God knows they're not your friend. My job isn't to create a bigger barrier between myself and you. You already know I'm a lawyer. If you're not going to hire me, you're not going to hire me. But I don't need to wear a suit to feel more important about something. And that worked for me. And I think it could work for a lot of people if they were willing to take a chance.
Now, one of the things you talk about in here now, and it's interesting because you talk about somebody I know who's a trucking lawyer, Joe Freed, and how he just loves clients and tries to walk in their shoes. And I think maybe he's gone to the Jerry Spence Trial Lawyers College and all of that. But, it's interesting. And then the next page in your book, you talk about professional boundaries. Talk a little bit more about boundaries in the practice of law.
Yeah. they're paramount for your own success as a lawyer and your own success and sanity as a personal person. But the reality is, there's nothing that we do that's an emergency. There just
Rarely.
isn't. Right. I mean, right. In terms of getting a call from a client, there's nothing that you can do in that moment to change the outcome of everything else. Right? So even if criminal, if you call me when you're in jail, I can't do anything for you right then. Right. There's nothing you can do. So picking up the phone in the middle of the night isn't going to do something. So same thing with personal injury. I'm not going to pick up the phone from one of my clients after hours. There's just not anything that is that important. And people go, oh, well, they'll find another lawyer or they'll leave me. They won't. They won't. I mean, it just doesn't happen. Like, I think we build up these ideas and these, tragic, catastrophic things in our mind that are going to happen. And then how often do they actually do? And I can tell you, they have never happened. So it's about creating boundaries for you to be the best version of yourself. And you are not going to be the best version of yourself as a lawyer if you can't get work done, if you can't focus on something for an extended period of time.
Or if you're tired. I mean, you talk in here about sleep a lot, which to me, so, I mean, I think I listen to Dr. Pete Aratia's podcast a lot. He goes kind of a deep dive into exercise and medicine and things like that. And, he says there's never been medicine or a drug invented that is as super as sleep is and exercise.
Yeah.
And so you talk in here about you always try to get 7 hours of sleep at least a night.
Definitely. And I mean, it varies a little bit for each person, but these people that go, I can sleep when I'm dead. Okay, you're speeding that clock up by about 20 years.
Right.
Yeah, it's just not, you can't overcome that, through chemicals or, willpower. It's just not going to happen.
So let me ask you this, and you talk a little bit in here about blocking off your communication time every day. I think after 2 p.m. is the time for talking to clients or answering emails and stuff like that. I've had so many great events, moments. I'm out to dinner, having a great time, or I'm at a sporting event, or I'm on a hike, and I take that glance of my smartphone, and I see that email from that angry client or that angry opposing counsel, and it just torpedoes whatever it is I'm doing.
Yep.
How do you avoid that little glance at your email or your text that just potentially deflates whatever it is you're doing?
Yeah, I think, I think it's easier for me because of what I've been through, right? It puts a lot of things in perspective about what really matters in life. When you come face to face with such, insanity like I did. But clearly my goal with the book and what I do is to keep people from getting to the point where I did before they start doing something. So if I hadn't gone through what I'd gone through, I would say this. You have to decide which is more important to you, living your life or living your life to work. And right now it may seem like a great idea to, spend that time looking at your emails or things like that, because you get the next case, because you can make more money and you can do this and you can do that, and you've got to be able to retire and you want to pay for kids' education. Look, I get it. This is not an easy concept and it's not an easy thing to overcome. But at the end of the day, none of us know how long we have. It doesn't matter what you believe about afterlife or anything like that. None of us know how long we have. It could be tomorrow. It could be 10 days from now. It could be 40 years. But do you ever want to look back whenever that is and say, wow, I really wish, I'd spent more time working? Or are you going to look back and say, I really wish I'd spent more time living my life, whatever that looks like for you? And every time you say yes to something, this is something I learned from Joe. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. There's a cost. And it's just a matter of whether you recognize what that cost is at the moment or not.
It's very weird. I just read Eric Larson's The Splendid and the Vile, and it's about London during the Blitzkrieg in the early 40s. And there's a lot in there about Winston Churchill. Mm-hmm. So Winston Churchill, while London is being bombed, while he's before America got into World War II, England is kind of isolated. I mean, there was real doubt as to whether England was going to, Great Britain was going to even survive, whether they were going to be invaded. And, you had Winston Churchill, who was very much up against it for a very long time. I mean, even after America entered the war. And if you look at what Winston Churchill's daily schedule was in the midst of the war, he would literally change into pajamas in the middle of the day. I'm not recommending people do this necessarily, but he would change into pajamas in the middle of the day and get in bed, like literally change into pajamas, go upstairs at 10 Downing Street, get under the covers and take like a long nap.
Yeah.
He would get in the bathtub and yell through the door at people, at his staffers and stuff. He was not working 24/7 in the midst of World War II. And reading a biography right now of Leonardo da Vinci, who he actually has fewer finished works of art than people think, and wasn't spending all his time working. There are a lot of great people who happen to live before email and before smartphones, who managed to do some fairly spectacular things with their lives.
Well, and I think it's quality over quantity too. And that's for every minute of your life. And I think that's just overarching concept. It's, how much of it is really going to make a difference at the end of the day? Is you looking, just as an example, you looking at that email from the, mad client or mad opposing counsel going to change the outcome of anything? Other than your emotions right then, which is detracting.
Other than it's going to ruin the Braves game I'm
Right.
presently at when I read it.
Exactly. And I mean, especially for people who have kids, I think this is a great thing to think about. People I know, I don't have children myself, I decided not to, but my goddaughters, I'm never going to look back and say, I didn't work enough and I didn't spend enough time away from them, right? You always are going to say, I wish I was there for this moment, or I wish I, could spend more time, doing this with them. And I think COVID, for all the bad that came out of it, this is one of the good things. People recognize that time spent in meaningful relationships matters. It just does. That's why, why we get that satisfaction from it. Even if we're introverts, we get the satisfaction from being in meaningful relationships. And yes, you work and have relationships with people you work with, but that's not going to be what's fulfilling. It's going to be fulfilling with people you care about.
And that's why so many people are refusing to go back to that now.
Yeah. And good for them.
Right. Well, tell me a little bit. We sort of left the story here off at you starting your plaintiff's practice and how you set it up. But I think you've got a new sort of frontier in your professional life, and I'd love to talk to you about that for a few minutes.
Sure. Yeah. So I am pivoting to being the happiness lawyer. I want to help lawyers and people who work with lawyers, like I said, go through what I went through, but
without the trauma.
Without the trauma, not hitting a rock bottom. And it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes guidance. But it is possible. And I create an environment that is relatable. I've been there, done that, literally. I'm a lawyer as well, and it's confidential. And I think that's the biggest thing for people is it's fear that keeps you from doing a lot of things. And one of them is being willing to change what isn't working for you out of the fear of being different or being seen as, less than. So helping other people go through that. And the whole reason I am moving away from my practice is not because I don't want to practice law. I do enjoy practicing law. I still love personal injury. But as a practical matter, it is a bad business model, like for sustainability without doing a lot of major things. And I see how saturated the market is still getting with lawyers. I see how many people cut corners and, try to undermine each other with the rules in terms of getting cases. And I'm never going to be that person that cuts corners, whether it's, legally or illegally or, ethically or unethically. I'm never going to be that person. So I'm not going to try to compete with people who are willing to do that. And to me, it's worth getting out now when I've enjoyed what I have and I'm not resentful of everything and going to something else that is more fulfilling for me.
So let me ask you this. So suppose, let's just say hypothetically, someone comes to you and they say, "Oh my gosh, Kathryn, I'm drowning. I have all these litigation cases. I've got suddenly all the judges are wanting me back and wanting to try everything. I have clients that just seem to hate me. My email inbox is filled up and I can't possibly answer all this stuff. And I feel like I'm drowning. I don't have time for my family. Like I'm drinking, more than I'd like. I'm not getting sleep. what should I do right now? Like if I had to triage and just sort of come up from this, if a client's if you had a potential consulting client come to you, what are some just initial things you would say to that person?
The initial thing I would say is, practically speaking, deal with the most immediate crisis you have to. Like in the next 24 hours is something going to happen, right? If we get past that and, it's just, I understand it's important, but just people being mad or demanding, that can wait. You have to take the time, and it can be over the course of a long period, but take the time to sit with yourself and ask yourself the very real question of, what do I want? Is this what makes me happy? And it's a very big question. It's loaded, and there's a lot to think about. The reality is, you're going to keep on that path unless you decide it's not what you want. And you may not realize it at that point, but it takes conscious effort and thought to recognize where you are and where you want to be. And if you're not being realistic with yourself or authentic with yourself, you're never going to be authentic with other people. You're never going to be authentic with the realities of what you're doing in your life. So taking that time to answer that question is the absolute root of everything that I do with people.
And practically, what does that look like? I mean, okay, ask yourself these questions. So they're going to say, Kathryn, okay, in the next week, physically, what should I do?
Yeah, you should sit there. I'm not kidding. Sit there and say, is there something I have to do in the next 24 hours? Okay, get it done. Take the next 3, 5, however long hours you can for the rest of the day and say, does this make me happy? And people will go, well, I'm not happy now. That's not what I asked you. Does working in law,
you do the same thing in the book.
Make you happy?
You post this question at the beginning of the book, and then you say, don't answer this right now.
Yeah.
And then you tell your story, and then you come back to that question.
Because everybody can come up with things that, like, I'm happy when I do this. I'm happy when I make money. I'm happy when I'm in court. I'm happy here. Are you really, though? Are you really happy? And I think we've deluded ourselves into thinking that happiness is success.
Mm-hmm.
Not even think. I know we have. And so, again, we all have bills to pay. We have to make a living. We don't know how long we're going to be here. We have to hedge our bets on that one, right? I recognize that. But we can do it in a way that is healthy and encounters adversity in a way that is fulfilling and sustainable. And if you're not happy doing what you're doing, then you have to start recognizing, what can I do from there? But the first question of all this is, are you happy?
Right. And if you come up with the answer, well, no, I'm not. I'm not really happy. And, looking at the numbers from the beginning of your book, lots of lawyers aren't happy. Lots of, like statistically significant is how depressed and anxious people in law are, particularly litigators.
Yeah.
And you compare it to doctors and nurses, and I think maybe we're a little worse.
Yeah.
So given that kind of the norm and the law is unhappiness, those lawyers and are authentic and are honest, who are happy, what do you think are some things they're doing that the rest of us aren't?
I think they've stopped caring what people think, and they're not afraid of failure, however that's defined for them. And that's why you have to answer that question, are you happy first? Mm-hmm. Because the next step is, okay, say you are, then you're going to keep doing what you're doing. And I don't think people are being honest with themselves when they say that, if they're in that position.
And if they're coming to you,
coming to me, they're not, which is the first step, is accepting that you're not happy, right? Mm-hmm. So then you say, no, I'm not happy. What do you do then? Okay, I help you figure out who you are, truly are, not who you've been playing or who you think you should be, but who you truly are, what makes you happy, and how to get you there. Because even if before you come to me, you say, I'm not happy. Okay, what does make me happy? Okay, maybe it's golfing, maybe it's hiking, maybe it's spending time with your kids, maybe it's, being in the courtroom and actually trying the cases, but everything up to that point, it's god awful for you and you're miserable. Mm-hmm. So what changes do you have to make to start making those things possible in your life? And I know it seems trivial given what you were just describing, a situation, right? Where there's so many things going on. There's no good time to do it, right?
Right.
There's no good time for a crisis to happen. Let me tell you, there's no good time. You can't prepare for that. You have to be the one that stops everything else and is willing to take the time to answer those basic questions, because if nobody's going to do it for you, you are going to live the rest of your life on that wheel, or until you die, quite frankly, of something else. And I know that's raw and brutal, but it's true. And how many people have we seen die prematurely because they haven't taken care of themselves and having not been happy? By then it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be the one that stops this cycle and can do it for you.
And it sounds like with your happiness lawyer clients, you're not really telling people here's the 5 things you ought to do. You're literally encouraging them to reflect and ask questions.
I am, and I'm that guy for them, because I've never been somebody, and we talked about this before we started recording, that just rattles off platitudes, right?
Right.
I mean, clearly, if it was as easy as being happy, we all would have done it. Clearly, if it was as easy as you taking back time and just, not booking yourself so much, you would have already done it. There's a reason that we don't, and there's a reason that people are unhappy. It's because they don't know how to be happy, and happiness is different for everyone. So I guide them through the process that I went through to recognize what they want. And if it's staying in law and keeping in practice, that's totally fine. I'm not suggesting that anybody should get out of law to be happy. What I am suggesting is reevaluating it, making it what you want it to be, and recognizing that what you're afraid of the most is failure. And failure is not, I just don't think it's real. I know that sounds crazy, but we have this idea of what it is, and we do everything in our power to avoid it. But it's really an opportunity for learning. And we have just been, taught from an early age, winners and losers, and there's success and there's failure. And that's just not the case. We all know as lawyers, there's a lot of gray area out there.
So we're a lot of us are living to avoid a thing that we haven't really even defined.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy, isn't it?
And we're also living to impress people we don't particularly like.
Right.
And so the lawyers, and probably the lawyers that have learned to walk away from all of that, probably the ironic part of it is they're probably finding financial success the moment have stopped worrying about it.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's, it's hard. I get it. That's why it's the status quo. That's why I say it's a socially validated addiction. Turns out we're all doing it in some capacity or another, not just lawyers, the stay-at-home moms that are keeping up with Pinterest and, gluten-free cupcakes, like, for God's sakes, like, it's insane. But again, people will say, yeah, I hear you. That sounds great. I don't have the time. And like I said, there's never a good time.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be the one that has to make that decision and say, well, if I don't do this, what's the worst that happens? You live a unfulfilling life. And again, what's the one thing we can't get any more of? It's time.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you do if you knew when your time was up?
Oh,
you wouldn't be worrying about this.
Yeah, you'd live a completely different life.
And I've read a book, I think it's Solving for Happiness. And it's a guy, I can't remember what industry he was in, big like corporate investment industry. And he was living in Dubai. And his son, like 20-year-old son, had to have a routine surgery. And he died on the operating table. And just a freak accident. And he, understandably so, was crushed. And just thinking about, I spent all this time working to buy yachts and, travel and have all this money amassed. And all I want now is to have one more day with my son.
And he'd give up all of that.
He'd give up everything to have that. And I mean, that's extreme, but that's how you have to think, because otherwise you're just going to keep deluding yourself into thinking that this is normal and this is what you have to do. And nobody, like I said, I keep saying it because it's important, nobody is going to do this for you.
Well, if people want to make these changes, first of all, where can they find your book, Overcoming Addiction to the Status Quo?
It's on Amazon. You can also go to my website, thehappiness.lawyer.com, and it'll link you to Amazon, social media, and how to get in touch with me.
I bought it on Amazon, and it was at my door a day later, and it's a really good. It tells a really good story, a very compelling story, and it's a very short read. You can knock it out in a couple of days.
Yep. Thank you.
And where can people find you and what kind of services do you offer?
Yeah, so I am right now working on workshops. I do small group workshops quarterly, and then I do individual work with lawyers as well to do what I said, establish who you are, where you want to be, and how to get you there. And the workshops, I just do minuscule parts of that people can actively participate in and brainstorm off of each other. And they're very safe, kind of vetted groups that we all agree on confidentiality. So it's a great environment to really get your feet wet with working for me. Or with me. So you can go to my website, thehappinesslawyer.com, and it has information on how to contact me about that.
Well, thanks so much. I've taken more of your. I've looked at the meter, and I took way much more time than I thought I was going to take. So I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me, and it was wonderful.
Thanks for listening to The Advocate's Key. For more information and content like this, including a transcript of this episode, be sure to visit scottkeylaw.com, and please rate, review, and follow this show wherever you get your audio content.